Chris Brown, Steve Tasker, and joined now by my broadcast partner on the Bills Radio Network, former Bills center Eric Wood, also host of the Centered on Buffalo podcast, and Eric's appearance presented by Campbell's Chunky Soup. Big, craveable favorites collide in Chunky Soup's new Mac line, featuring flavors like Buffalo-style Chicken Mac, Chili Dog Mac, and Beefy Mac. Stock up for game day now at your local Wegmans. Chunky Soup that eats like a meal. Eric, the Bills made a meal out of the Panthers yesterday. 40-9 is the final, and by the middle of the third quarter, it had become a laugher, especially after 3 unanswered touchdown drives in the third quarter. What do you pull from that you feel is the most encouraging for this team going forward?
Did you prep that meal reference?
I did not.
Did you prep that?
It just came to me.
Oh, that was good. That was good. That was good. Yeah, leaving that game yesterday, coming out of the bye, we assumed that we'd see some new wrinkles, especially on the defensive side of the football. And we saw a ton of different wrinkles from this Bills defense. Jordan Poyer starting out as the starting safety, and then here comes Jordan Hancock in obvious pass situations. Max Hairston gets activated off IR, and I'll be honest, that came quicker than I thought, but very encouraged by the fact that they were able to get him out into action so quickly. And he looked confident out there, stuck a guy the first series he played out there, and just looked like he was having fun, and he's got some confidence to him. I thought both the linebackers played well yesterday. Talked all week about this Panthers rushing attack and how, they might, just muddy up this game and make it a close one to the end. And I thought the linebackers and the defensive front and everybody tackled better coming out of the bye week as well. And then up front, that defensive line dominated the game. And when you talk about encouragement, leaving the game, it probably starts with 55. Michael Hoecht is a difference maker out there. The energy, the juice, the passion, the tenacity that he plays with seems to rub off on the rest of the group. The fact that he had 5 pressures yesterday, a sack and a half, a forced fumble. He was everywhere, but what that does is it gives you another live body up there up front that's getting after the passer, and he's a mismatch inside, out on the edge. He was using power to consistently press the pocket and make Dalton uncomfortable, but then that frees up, Bosa to make plays, Rousseau to make plays. Ed Oliver had an early sack. Epinesa makes a huge play. Jordan Phillips gets a sack. All that being said, I loved what I saw from Michael Hoecht. We were excited all season to see him come back off that 6-game suspension. We liked what we saw from him in the preseason, but we knew that the Bills weren't going to, show their cards fully on how they were going to use them. Mainly this preseason just lined up on the end of the defensive front on each side in his normal end position. Yesterday, we saw him walking around consistently, whether it was on the interior or playing stand-up defensive end. I loved what I saw from him, and just the defense as a whole yesterday. I understand you're playing against Andy Dalton, and maybe you say that's how it should look against a backup QB. Well, this is a defense that's taken its lumps throughout this season, taken a ton of criticism, and yesterday the game script definitely went into their hands where they could tee off and get them away from a 2-dimensional game in the second half, but loved what I saw from the defense, I'll be honest.
Yeah, and because of the Ed Oliver injury, we don't know how bad it's going to be. He's not coming back anytime soon. But they, up until yesterday, and I think even if Ed was healthy, they're still tinkering with the personnel everywhere where they're rotating guys in. Michael Hoecht and Ogunjobi being back in the mix obviously means their rotation is going to change up front. But in the secondary, Poyer played, Hancock played, Max Hairston was in the game, Trey was in the game. You had a lot of guys working through. This defense really, for as good as it played yesterday, and the results were obvious, I think they're still settling in on what they think their best 11 might be going forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the best 11 is probably comes with some multiplicity. More base defense this year. We've seen that. Add some more size on the field. So 3 linebackers at times. Okay, now we get an obvious pass situation. We're bringing in dime defense, but that doesn't necessarily mean 4 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker. It could be 3 and 2. They're mixing and matching those personnel groupings. And, maybe moving forward, Jordan Poyer's your first and second down safety. And here comes Jordan Hancock as you gain him experience, but let him play to his strengths and use his athleticism on the back end and not necessarily give him a full workload in this first, real action in the Bills uniform, you work him in and you get him in certain packages where he could be super honed in on the game plan. And I'm very glad that they're getting those guys in there some experience, because when you think of the athleticism that a Hairston, that a Hancock can bring to the back end, but not saying, hey, it's your first game back, let's throw you to the wolves. I liked how they utilized them within the game plan. And then obviously the injury to Ed Oliver is heartbreaking. I mean, a guy that hurt his foot earlier in the season after being our defensive standout against the Ravens, starts the game off with a sack yesterday on the first possession to start a 3-and-out, and just understanding the presence he could be in the middle of that defense. Looks like we're going to be without him for a while. Now, what this likely looks like is kind of patch it together on first and second down like we've done for majority of the year at the defensive tackle position. And then when it comes to third down, it's going to be Hoecht doing what he did yesterday, a lot of times rushing from the interior, and then pair that up with a Ogunjobi, a Phillips, or maybe it's a 3-down look up front. But the fact that it seems like besides Oliver, we're starting to get healthier on that side of the ball gives us a lot of these options that I just talked about in being multiple.
And then on the offensive side of the ball, Eric, you noted it on the broadcast right away, just due in large part to the frequency with which we saw it. But it was clear that the Bills saw an opportunity to use James Cook's speed to the edges of the Carolina defense instead of messing with all-pro defensive lineman Derek Brown inside. Heck with that. Let's see if they can catch James Cook. And they could not. And they used the toss and the pitch plays all day long with tremendous success.
Yeah, all three running backs saw the pitch play or the toss play. James Cook, 10 of his 19 carries were on tosses yesterday. Strength of this front seven for the Panthers is their big boys up front. It starts with Derek Brown, but Robinson's a load in there. The other Brown's about, he's listed at 330. He looks about 350 out there. So get those guys running laterally and then let James Cook use his speed to figure out where he wants to go with it. But James Cook I get on here and gush every week about James Cook. And from a former offensive lineman's perspective, he's just got the incredible ability right now to turn what could be a loss on a play into a 3-yard gain. And I know that's not, going to make the highlight reel, but for us big boys up front, we miss a block or a guy comes through unaccounted for, he gets you a couple yards where you're not sitting at 2nd and 13. And then to have the vision, the contact balance, the pace that he plays with, and then also have the breakaway ability, that's just rare in this league. I mean, those guys are rare. They truly are. And the fact that James Cook has developed into this guy is incredible. I mean, a lot of times when you see guys like that, it's a Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin. He's drafted in the first round for a reason. It's Bijan Robinson. He's drafted in the first round for a reason. Those guys, you generally see it in college, maybe just for a couple years because they're getting to the NFL as quick as they can to avoid the wear and tear. But the fact that James Cook has developed into this is awesome. And the confidence that he's playing with, we mentioned on the broadcast yesterday, Chris, he saw one secondary defender on the outside and said, I'll just take this one myself, picks up 12. The guys up front didn't even have to get to the backers. And he picks up 12 on the play, just seeing that you have one cornerback out here. That's not going to cut it here. And so love what I'm seeing from Cook. You give this Bills offensive staff, you let Cromer or Brady get in the lab on some of this run game stuff. It was interesting to see how they came out of the bye where, yes, we've run a good amount of toss plays this year. They're generally toss cracks. So you get down blocking from the outside and you have a tackle pulling around or a guard pulling around out in space. We didn't see that yesterday. We saw old school pitch, everybody on a track, get these guys running and let James Cook cut off of it. I don't know that Carolina's seen that at all this year from the Bills, and they run it 10 times yesterday with James Cook for 94 yards. And there was times we used to call it boss, back on strong safety or back on Sam. It's basically a toss play, and yesterday the Bills running that with Reggie Gilliam. I haven't seen that from the Bills this year. I don't know if I saw it under Joe Brady last year, and they came out of the bye week and said, if you can't stop this, we're gonna run it down your throat.
Yeah, and they ran that toss a ton, and then they came back and ran that pinch trap with Reggie Gilliam leading him up through in between the tackles on the inside. And we've been talking about it.
For a touchdown.
the long touchdown, that was timed perfectly in that play selection. You know, people talk about setting up the play and you want to set up this play, the sequencing of these plays. That seemed to be quintessential exactly what happened on that long touchdown.
I know you're exactly right. So the timing of the play call, when you're gashing the team in the run, as an offense coordinator sitting up there, okay, now here comes our counter off of it. No pun intended. It was a counter play, but here comes our counter punch to you expecting now us to go with this toss play. We're going to give you Gilliam to the strong side. It looks just like that toss play that we've been gashing you with. Now it comes back to the backside, and it's 64 yards to the house with a flip into the end zone. And so that was fun to see yesterday. It was fun to see them be able to tee off on the Panthers the way they did. You know, the Panthers defense, they come into the game 7th in the NFL, 8th in the NFL in rush defense. You know, this isn't a team that's been gashed consistently throughout this season, and the Bills did it to them yesterday.
All right, so the passing game doesn't have to provide much because the run game was so dominant, but I'll address it since Josh did after the game. You know, he admitted that, you know, there's a little bit of a disjointed nature to their passing game, and he acknowledged it. I mean, as we know, Josh is one of the most self-aware quarterbacks we've ever been around, and he said, look, some things are a little bit off that we have to tighten up in the passing game. He didn't get into specifics per se, but he admitted that, you know, they're not in a rhythm that they want to be in through the course of a football game. It looked better in the third quarter. So what do you feel they have to tighten up based on what Josh said after the game?
Yeah, to me, like, barring you say, you know, everyone wants them to go out and get some big time wide receiver, which stresses the other team's coverage, gives you open windows because you got to put multiple bodies towards one guy. You know, we don't necessarily have that guy right now. There might be certain situations where they say we're going to key on Kincaid or we're going to key on Shakir just based upon, you know, formation or situations. But right now, we don't necessarily have that guy. And so everything's just got to be a little tighter because of it. Now, we saw them move around Keon Coleman a little bit more yesterday and not just let him sit out there with that X position wide and let them just put their best corner on him and play press man. They moved him around some more yesterday. It led to 3 catches in the game. There was a crossing route off a play action where Josh was on the roll. He dumps it down to Jackson Halls for the first down. He could have hit Keon there, but takes the first down in that situation. But to me, there's some missed throws. There's some miscommunication out there. And whether it's the miscommunication which causes the missed throws, I'm not sure. I'm not in those meetings right now. But, you know, think back to that play action pass in the first half where you got Coleman and Kincaid both right in the area. And we're on the broadcast saying, you thought it was the Coleman. I thought it was the Kincaid.
Yeah.
That's not a good sign. And so it's just got to get tighter. And the way they've been able to run the football this year, you just haven't had to rely on the passing game, which maybe could have helped it develop more to this point if you had to rely on it more. But, you know, moving forward, it's, you know, finding those guys that can either stretch the field, separate a man coverage. Getting Palmer back certainly would help. You know, I know everybody wants them to go out and get a receiver at the deadline. I heard when Brandon Beane was at the airport, people are chanting Olave, and, you know, we'll see how this next week or so plays out in that regard. But if you can get Palmer back, keep leaning into Kincaid, and I don't know that they pressed him too hard yesterday coming off the oblique. Continue to hammer down on Shakir because, you know, he seems to be the guy that Josh has the most confidence going to. Now, most of his catches are right around the line of scrimmage, but we've seen a few times this year what he could do after the catch where it doesn't necessarily just turn into a 7-8 yard play. He could break the big one. He's got the speed, he's got the elusiveness, and the tackle breaking ability. And so, long story long here for you guys. It's just got to get tighter all around. Where, you know, yesterday looks a little different if Josh is able to hit Elijah Moore on the whole shot. If, you know, Josh maybe sees Keon on the one, and, you know, Josh might be coached to take the first down in that situation. But, you know, if he scans down the field and you pop Keon for a 20, 25-yard pass there, maybe we're having a different conversation, but it's just not quite tight enough right now. And hopefully with as experience as the season goes on, finding out all these guys' strengths, hopefully get Palmer back here soon. It could be where it needs to be, where you combine that passing game, a consistent passing game with a dominant rushing attack, and you like where this Bills offense is at. I mean, right now they're averaging just under 30 points a game, set a franchise record last year with 30.9 yards per game or 30.9 points per game. So the production's there. You just know that there's going to be some weeks where the run game isn't clicking. And right now, all three of us could probably say we know it could happen. And you got 17 back there, so it certainly could happen any given week. But can we lean into that passing game to take over a football game? I'm not sure right now.
And it's hard to get up in arms about it because you look at the season. Like Josh had 148 yards against the Jets. They won by 20. You had 163 yards against Carolina. They won by 31. Baltimore, where they won by 2, he had 394 yards. Remember, in that game to open it. Against New Orleans, he had 209 yards, Pat. They have not needed it. They're winning by double digits now. And in the losses, same thing. In the loss against the Patriots, though, you look at it, it's like it wasn't the passing game that did it to them. It was the turnovers, dropping the ball inside your own 10-yard line and turning it over inside their 20-yard line and then taking 11 penalties. Yeah, so it's not like this lack of a passing game, but the low yardage and the lack of spectacular plays in the passing game, that hasn't been the reason for their struggles. In fact, they haven't struggled that much except for maybe you can look at the Atlanta game and say, wow, where was it there? That's concerning. That's 1 out of 7 games, and it has looked like everything it needed to be to win these games. And they're averaging double-digit wins in every game this year. It's hard to get upset about it.
Yeah, and against Atlanta, maybe the passing game looks different if Palmer's out there and Kincaid's out there. You go into that game, Kincaid's out for the game. Just based upon the early game script, you assume Palmer was going to play a major role in that one. And, you're without maybe your 2 best downfield threats right now, and it becomes more difficult. Now, the other guys in those instances have to step up and make plays, but it becomes more difficult there. So, yeah, look, they're gonna be back in the lab, but they're gonna keep hammering in on getting on the same page and tightening it up, and all that we've talked about so far. But right now, you lean into this run game, and then yesterday we just kept waiting for the safeties to come down, and Carolina stayed fairly disciplined with the 2 shell for a lot of that game from our perspective from the booth. At some point, people are going to have to dedicate more bodies, and that's where your chunk plays can happen.
All right, so looking ahead, big week this week, obviously, with the Chiefs, who are coming off a short week because they play tonight against Washington at Arrowhead. Of course, they get the backup quarterback, Marcus Mariota, not Jaden Daniels for Washington. And Kansas City, if they win tonight, they move into the playoff picture because they will leapfrog Jacksonville, who's sitting on a bye. Even though they lost a head-to-head to them, they will move ahead of them by virtue of their 5th win. So they'll have more wins at 5-3 if they beat Washington tonight, which I think many of us are anticipating, which sets up the game this weekend as a pretty big one. How big do you feel, even this early in the season, that it will factor into the conference playoff seeding?
I think it's major because when you look at both these teams and the way the season has played out the last 4 or 5 years, you want to get them at home in the playoffs if you can. We'll see if Indy can stay hot and make a run at that 1 seed. But going into the season, that was the goal. Get the conference championship game at home in Buffalo if you can get hot enough and make a run in the playoffs. And so this is going to be a major game, just looking at how these 2 teams are likely going to finish this season. So it's a big one. And the Chiefs are playing much better football, kind of the opposite of the Bills. They're leaning into their pass game, and their rush game hasn't necessarily been there. Mahomes is rushing more this season in the regular season than he generally does, up over 35 yards a game rushing. So he's leaning into that more. They've got healthier at receiver. And so it's going to be a good matchup. It'll be another good one here in Orchard Park come Sunday. That's for sure.
Yeah, you still get the feeling that no matter the roller coaster that has been for the Bills in the last month, that both those teams, the Chiefs, the Bills, obviously the Patriots are in the mix, and now you got a couple of teams in the West with the Denver Broncos and the LA Chargers, as well as the Colts. I mean, there's some new players in the upper echelon of the AFC, along with Buffalo and the Kansas City Chiefs. It's going to be a fun second half of this season, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And it's it's the way it's played out so far. If you had Indy at 7-1 to start the season, good on you.
Yeah.
You're a
I've known
rich person
Shane
right now.
Steichen. I've known Shane Steichen since 2009 or 2010 when he was a low-level assistant at the University of Louisville. Tremendous fan of his, always have been. Great dude, great offensive mind. Put a stable presence at quarterback there, and you see what they can do. And then their defense is playing at a super high level, and a lot of it kind of the cream rises to the top towards the end of the season, and then obviously injuries can play a major factor in the season. I mean, look at the Bengals, the Ravens, and how their seasons have unfolded mainly because of injuries. But it's gonna be a fun one the rest of the way, that's for sure.
All right, Eric, thanks for the time, and we'll see you up here this weekend for Bills Chiefs.
Okay, sounds good. Looking forward to it. Have a great week, guys.